The castle sleeps. Torches gutter low in their iron sconces, casting shadows that breathe against stone walls older than memory. In the great hall, embers die in silence. The guards at their posts lean into the weight of midnight, eyes half closed, breath fogging in the cold. Somewhere in the darkness, a door closes without sound. Somewhere, a hand moves with the precision of a surgeon, the patience of a spider. Somewhere, death is already inside. This is not the death of battlefields, not the honest brutality of sword meeting bone, of blood spraying hot across chainmail, of screams that echo and fade into legend. This is the other death, the one that arrives in silence, the one that leaves no wound, no witness, no name, the one that transforms a living man into a corpse without ever announcing its presence. In the medieval world, murder was an art practiced in two languages. The first was the language of violence, open, brutal, unmistakable. A dagger in the street, an ambush on a forest road, a blade drawn in fury during a feast, wine and blood mixing on the rushes. These murders were messy, public, often foolish. They created widows and blood feuds. They demanded justice, or at least revenge. But the second language was something else entirely. It was the language of shadows and patience, of mechanisms hidden in plain sight, of poisons that mimicked disease, of accidents that were anything but accidental, of deaths so perfectly disguised that even the victim, in his final moments, might not understand what was happening to him. These were the assassinations that rewrote history without ever entering it. The murders that remained, even centuries later, wrapped in the quiet of the unsolved. Before we continue, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. Consider the terror of such a death. You are a lord, a bishop, a merchant prince. You have enemies? Of course you have enemies. Power breeds them like standing water breeds flies. You know they whisper your name in back rooms. You know they toast your downfall in taverns you'll never enter. So you take precautions. You taste your food through servants. You travel with guards. You sleep behind locked doors in rooms high above the street. You believe yourself safe. And then, without warning, without drama, your body begins to betray you. Perhaps it starts with a headache that will not fade. Perhaps your hands begin to tremble during Mass. Perhaps you wake one morning and cannot catch your breath, as though the air itself has turned to water. The physicians come with their leeches and their prayers, their astrology and their poultices. They bleed you. They purge you. They consult charts and debate humors while your skin turns the color of old parchment. And you die. Not quickly, not mercifully. You die by inches, in confusion and pain, surrounded by people who cannot help you because they do not understand what is killing you. Your death is ruled an act of God, a weakness of the flesh, the inevitable frailty of mortal man. Your enemies attend your funeral with appropriately sorrowful faces. They inherit your lands, your titles, your position, and they sleep soundly because no one is hunting them. No one even knows a murder has occurred. This is the genius of the perfect assassination. It does not merely end a life. It erases itself. It becomes illness, accident, misfortune, anything but what it truly is. The murderer walks free not because he has evaded justice, but because justice never knew to look for him. The crime dissolves into the fog of medieval uncertainty, where death was common and explanations were rare, where God's will and human malice were often indistinguishable. The methods varied. Some required the patience of years. Others demanded technical knowledge that bordered on the alchemical. A few exploited the very systems meant to provide safety, the rituals of the church, the architecture of fortification, the trust between lord and servant. All of them shared one quality. They were designed not just to kill, but to remain forever in shadow. What follows are not legends, not folklore embellished by time and telling. These are the assassinations that worked precisely because they were never solved. Methods so clever, so thoroughly concealed, that even now, across the gulf of centuries, we can only piece together what might have happened. Murders that rewrote the fate of houses and kingdoms while leaving behind nothing but bodies and questions. The castle still sleeps. But now you know what moves through its corridors. Now you understand what hides behind the gifts and the courtesies, the prayers and the promises. Death does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply waits, silent as stone, patient as winter, for the perfect moment to stop a heart and leave no trace behind. The poison in the psalter. The library is silent except for the whisper of turning pages. Afternoon light filters through narrow windows, illuminating dust that hangs suspended like ash. Lord Domenico sits at his reading desk, a man of 43 years with the bearing of someone who has survived court politics through caution and calculation. His fingers, long and careful, turn another page of the Psalter that arrived 3 weeks ago, a gift, the messenger said, from an admirer of his patronage of the church. It is a beautiful thing. The calfskin binding is soft as a child's cheek. The illuminations glow with gold leaf and lapis lazuli. Each page is a work of devotion, rendered in pigment and prayer. He has been reading it daily, as is proper for a man of his station. Morning psalms before Mass, evening prayers before supper. His lips move soundlessly, forming Latin words worn smooth by 1,000 years of repetition. He does not notice the faint residue on his fingertips. How could he? There is nothing to see. The pages feel no different than any other parchment. Perhaps slightly waxy, but that could be the oils used in preparation. He wets his thumb to turn another page, an unconscious habit, something he has done since childhood. The moisture on his skin touches the surface of the vellum. Molecules invisible to the human eye transfer from treated page to living flesh. This is how the poison enters. Not through wine, which would be tasted, not through food, which would be tested by servants who would die first, raising alarm. Not through any method that requires proximity or force or witnesses. This poison requires only patience, routine, and the victim's own piety. Every time Lord Domenico reads his prayers, he doses himself. Every time he wets his finger to turn a page, he renews the contact. The toxin accumulates. Slowly. Invisibly. Inevitably. The substance used is likely arsenic, though it could be any of a dozen compounds known to medieval poisoners with access to alchemical knowledge. What matters is the preparation. The pages have been treated with a solution so diluted, so carefully applied, that a single exposure would do nothing. Even a dozen exposures might produce only mild discomfort. But over weeks, over months, with religious regularity, the cumulative effect becomes catastrophic. Arsenic was called inheritance powder for good reason. It mimicked wasting disease. The symptoms developed gradually: fatigue, loss of appetite, a weakness in the limbs, stomach pains that came and went, headaches, confusion. Nothing that pointed definitively to murder. Everything that could be explained by age, by overwork, by the simple fragility of flesh. Medieval physicians, with their humoral theories and their bloodletting, would treat the symptoms and hasten the death, never suspecting that the sickness came not from within, but from without. Lord Domenico begins to feel unwell in the 4th week. He attributes it to rich food, to the changing seasons. By the 5th week, he cannot finish his meals. His servants notice he has grown pale, that he moves through the halls like a man wading through water. By the 6th week, he can barely rise from his bed. The Psalter sits on his bedside table. Even now, weakened and confused, he reaches for it. His confessor, visiting daily, encourages him to find comfort in prayer. Lord Domenico's trembling fingers turn the pages. His lips move in devotion. He is killing himself with Scripture. The physicians bleed him. They administer purgatives that empty his bowels and leave him weaker still. They debate his stars, his humors, the alignment of planets at his birth. They bring relics to touch his fevered skin. None of them examine the book. Why would they? It is a holy object. It radiates innocence. The idea that prayer itself could be weaponized does not occur to them, cannot occur to them, because it violates the fundamental order of their world. Lord Domenico dies on a Tuesday morning, 8 weeks after the Psalter arrived. The death is recorded as natural causes, a wasting illness, perhaps a tumor of the stomach, possibly a weakness of the heart. His confessor closes the dead man's eyes and offers prayers for his soul. The Psalter, that beautiful instrument of murder, is placed with his other possessions. Perhaps another member of the family will inherit it. Perhaps it will claim a second victim. Or perhaps the assassin will retrieve it quietly, erasing even this final evidence. No investigation is launched. No suspect is questioned. The gift giver is never identified because no one thinks to look. The messenger who delivered the book is long gone. Perhaps dead himself, perhaps never real. Merely a role played once and discarded. Lord Domenico's lands passed to his cousin, a man who had much to gain and nothing to fear. Because murder, in this case, wore the face of devotion. And who suspects God's word of carrying death between its sacred pages? The library remains silent. The dust still hangs in afternoon light. And somewhere, perhaps in another city, another Psalter is being carefully prepared. Another set of pages is being treated with patient, invisible malice. Another victim is being selected. Someone pious. Someone predictable. Someone who will never suspect that their daily prayers are counting down the hours until their last breath. The perfect crime requires no violence, only method, only patience, only the understanding that people will always trust what they have been taught to revere. The confession that killed. The confessional booth stands in the north transept of the cathedral, carved from dark oak that has absorbed centuries of whispered sins. It is a Thursday evening in late autumn. Vespers have concluded. The last of the faithful have departed, their footsteps fading into the cold streets beyond the heavy doors. Only the smell of incense remains, hanging in the vaulted darkness like the memory of prayer. Bishop Arnaud enters through the side door reserved for clergy. He is 61 years old, a man who has navigated the treacherous politics of the medieval church with the skill of a shipmaster reading dangerous waters. He has made enemies, that is the cost of power, but he has also made himself indispensable. Tonight, as he does every Thursday, he will hear confessions until Compline. It is his practice, his demonstration of humility, his public performance of the pastoral duty that validates his authority. He settles into the priest's side of the confessional. The wood is worn smooth by decades of use. The small latticed window between the two chambers is barely visible in the gloom, a screen of carved wood with gaps no wider than a man's finger, designed to preserve anonymity while allowing voices to pass. On the other side, the penitent's chamber waits in darkness. Bishop Arnaud folds his hands and prepares his heart for the litany of small sins he will hear. Marital infidelities, petty thefts, envy and anger and pride in their endless variations. He does not hear the door open on the other side. The penitent enters without sound, settling onto the kneeling bench with a quietness that suggests either deep reverence or careful planning. A moment passes, then a voice, male, low, distorted slightly by the wooden screen between them. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." The words are ritual. Bishop Arnaud responds with the formula worn smooth by repetition. "Speak, my child, and be unburdened." The voice begins to confess. The sins are baroque, detailed, the sort of catalog that suggests either genuine torment or careful preparation. Bishop Arnaud listens with half his attention, as he has learned to do over decades of hearing confessions. His mind drifts to tomorrow's cathedral chapter meeting, to the political maneuvering required to secure a favorable vote on the matter of rents from church lands. He does not see the hand that rises on the other side of the screen. He does not see the thin blade, narrow as a knitting needle, long as a man's forearm, designed specifically for this purpose. The voice continues confessing, steady and unhurried, providing audio cover for what happens next. The blade slides through one of the gaps in the lattice screen. It is angled upward with surgical precision. The assassin cannot see his target clearly. The darkness and the screen prevent that, but he does not need to see. He knows where a man's throat will be when he sits in that specific position. He has practiced this angle, this thrust, perhaps on meat, perhaps on the living. The blade finds its mark. It enters just below Bishop Arnaud's jawbone, on the left side, driving upward and inward. The angle is perfect. The blade severs the carotid artery and continues into the soft tissue at the base of the skull. Death is not instant, but it is inevitable and swift. The bishop's hands fly to his throat. He tries to cry out, but the wound prevents it. Only a wet, choking sound emerges, barely louder than a cough, easily lost in the vast emptiness of the cathedral. The blade withdraws as smoothly as it entered. On the other side of the screen, the voice continues for another moment, completing the false confession, maintaining the illusion of normalcy. Then silence. Then the soft sound of the penitent's door opening and closing. Footsteps moving away through the cathedral, calm and measured. Just another soul departing after unburdening himself to God's representative. Bishop Arnaud slumps in the confessional. Blood flows down his ecclesiastical robes, black in the darkness, invisible against the purple fabric. He is conscious for perhaps 30 seconds, long enough to understand what has happened. Not long enough to call for help. His last thoughts are unknown. Perhaps he prays. Perhaps he curses. Perhaps he simply experiences animal confusion as his vision darkens and the cold spreads through his limbs. He is discovered an hour later by a junior priest arriving to prepare the cathedral for compline. The young man opens the confessional door and finds his bishop slumped against the wooden wall, eyes open, face frozen in an expression that might be surprise or might simply be the mask death wears. The blood has pooled on the floor of the booth. The smell of it mingles with the lingering incense. The investigation that follows is brief and fruitless. No one saw anyone enter or leave the cathedral during the relevant time. But then, people enter and leave churches constantly. That is their purpose. The weapon is never found. The assassin likely walked out with it concealed beneath his cloak, dropped it in the river an hour later, went home to supper. The genius of the method is its exploitation of sacred architecture. The confessional exists to provide anonymity, to create a space where sins can be admitted without shame, where the penitent's identity is protected by tradition and divine law. The screen that shields the sinner's face also shields the murderer's blade. The ritual that demands privacy becomes the perfect cover for assassination. No one knows who confessed to Bishop Arnaud that evening. No one can know. The sanctity of confession forbids inquiry. And even if someone had seen a man leaving the cathedral around that time, what of it? Dozens of people come to confess. The entire system is designed to make them invisible, forgettable, anonymous before God. The bishop's death is attributed to brigands, perhaps, or to forces unknown. His enemies are suspected but never charged. Without evidence, without witnesses, there can be no justice. The case remains unsolved. The confessional booth, after being cleaned and reconsecrated, returns to use. And perhaps the assassin returns as well. Perhaps he kneels in that same booth months later, confessing to a different priest the sin of murder. Perhaps he receives absolution. Perhaps he walks out of the cathedral with his soul washed clean, his crime forgiven by the very institution he violated. Or perhaps he never confesses at all. Perhaps he understands that some sins are best left between oneself and the darkness. The candle of slow death. The candle arrives on a winter afternoon, wrapped in linen and accompanied by a note written in an elegant hand. For peaceful contemplation during long nights, from a grateful merchant whose ship you spared from unjust taxation. Signor Matteo reads the note twice, searching his memory for which petitioner might have sent such a gift. He is a merchant prince of Venice, a man who has built wealth through shipping routes and favorable contracts with the Doge's office. He receives gifts constantly: wine, fabric, sweetmeats, objects designed to curry favor or express gratitude. This candle is unusual. It is thick as a man's wrist, pale as bone, and smells faintly of beeswax and something else, something herbal. perhaps rosemary or lavender. The scent is pleasant. The craftsmanship is excellent. Matteo places it on the table beside his bed, where he reads correspondence and account books in the hours before sleep. That evening, he lights it for the first time. The flame burns clean and steady. The wax melts evenly, without the smoking or guttering that plagues cheaper candles. The scent grows stronger as the wax warms. Still pleasant, still subtle. A fragrance that seems to ease the tension in his shoulders and quiet the endless calculations running through his mind. He reads for 2 hours by its light, then extinguishes it with a silver snuffer and slides into sleep more easily than he has in months. He does not know that the candle is killing him. The secret is in the wick. It has been treated with mercuric oxide, a compound that, when heated by flame, releases mercury vapor into the air. The concentration is low enough that the smell is masked by the herbal additives in the wax. The vapor is invisible. It disperses slowly through his bedchamber, rising with the warmth of the flame. And Matteo, sitting close to read by its light, breathes it deeply into his lungs, night after night. Mercury poisoning is patient. It does not announce itself with sudden agony or dramatic collapse. Instead, it accumulates. The body cannot easily expel the heavy metal. It settles in tissue, in organs, in bone. The symptoms begin subtly, so subtly that the victim attributes them to age, to stress, to the natural fluctuations of health. After 2 weeks, Matteo notices a tremor in his hands. Slight, barely perceptible, but enough that his handwriting becomes less precise. He attributes it to cold weather, to spending too many hours gripping a quill. After 3 weeks, his gums begin to bleed when he eats. His teeth ache. He visits a barber surgeon who pulls one molar, then another, diagnosing corruption of the mouth. The extractions do not help. By the 4th week, his sleep becomes disturbed. He wakes in the night drenched in sweat, his heart racing, pursued by dreams so vivid and terrible that he cannot speak of them. During the day, his mood shifts unpredictably. He becomes irritable with servants who have served him faithfully for years. He grows suspicious of his business partners, seeing plots and betrayals where none exist. His wife, frightened by these changes, suggests he consult a physician. The physician examines him thoroughly. He studies Matteo's urine, reads his pulse, consults astrological charts. He diagnoses an imbalance of humors, too much black bile perhaps, or a weakness of the liver. He prescribes bleeding and a diet of boiled vegetables. The treatments make Matteo weaker. The tremors worsen. His hair begins to fall out in clumps. His skin takes on a grayish cast. Through all of this, the candle burns. Matteo has developed an attachment to it. The scent, he believes, is one of the few things that brings him comfort. When his wife suggests he stop using it and let her bring oil lamps instead, he refuses with uncharacteristic anger. The candle has become a ritual, a small island of consistency in a body and mind that are betraying him in ways he cannot understand. By the 8th week, Matteo can no longer conduct business. His hands shake so badly he cannot hold a quill. His memory fails him mid-sentence. He forgets the names of men he has known for decades. He becomes convinced that his servants are stealing from him, that his wife is conspiring with his rivals, that the walls of his palazzo are closing in. The physicians bleed him again. They administer purgatives. They bring holy relics. Nothing helps. The candle burns lower. 3/4 gone now. Then 7/8. Matteo lies in his bed, no longer able to rise without assistance, and watches the flame dance in the darkness. It is, in his deteriorating mind, the only beautiful thing left in a world that has turned hostile and strange. He does not connect the candle with his illness. How could he? It is simply wax and wick, a source of light and pleasant fragrance. It has been his companion through these terrible weeks. On a March evening, with rain hammering against the windows, Matteo dies. The cause is officially recorded as a wasting disease, possibly caused by poisoning of the humors or corruption of the vital organs. The physicians note the unusual symptoms, the tremors, the mental deterioration, the hair loss, but have no framework to understand them. Mercury poisoning will not be widely recognized or documented for another 2 centuries. The candle, burned nearly to its base, is discarded by a servant, clearing the death chamber. It goes into the fire along with the bed linens, which are burned to prevent contagion. The evidence of murder turns to smoke and ash. No one investigates the gift. No one remembers which merchant supposedly sent it. The note, if it was kept at all, is lost among Matteo's papers. His business interests are divided among his heirs and rivals. Some prosper from his death. Some had motive. All have alibis, because the murder happened slowly over 2 months, in the privacy of a bedchamber, administered by the victim's own hand each time he lit that innocent-looking candle. The method is nearly perfect. It requires no access to the victim after the initial delivery. It leaves no wound, no obvious evidence of foul play. The poison is self-administered through an action, reading by candlelight, that is completely normal and expected. And because the symptoms develop gradually and mimic various natural diseases, no specific moment of poisoning can be identified. The murder is diffused across time, rendered invisible by its own patience. Somewhere in Venice, perhaps the assassin watches from a distance as Matteo's funeral procession winds through the narrow streets. Perhaps he feels satisfaction, or perhaps nothing at all. Perhaps he is already preparing another gift for another victim. A candle. Beautifully crafted, pleasant smelling, lethal. A light that brings only darkness. The crossbow beneath the bridge. The bridge is old stone. 3 arches spanning a river that runs cold and brown with autumn rain. It connects the Duke's hunting lodge to the forest road beyond, a route traveled daily by nobles and their retinues. The stones are worn smooth by decades of hoofbeats and cartwheel ruts. Moss grows in the shaded crevices where sunlight never reaches. It is, in every way, unremarkable. One of 1,000 such bridges spanning 1,000 such rivers across the medieval landscape. Sir Gaspard crosses it every morning at dawn. His routine is predictable, carved into the rhythm of his life like words into granite. He rides alone, preferring solitude to the chatter of squires, making his way to the Duke's stables where he oversees the training of war horses. He is a creature of habit, and in this habit lies his death. Beneath the central arch, hidden in the shadows where bridge meets riverbank, a mechanism waits. It has been constructed over several nights by hands that understand leverage and tension, patience and precision. The device is a crossbow, massive and fixed in position, its windlass cranked to maximum draw. The bow is nearly 5 feet across, the string as thick as a man's thumb. The quarrel, the bolt, a span of steel-tipped oak designed to punch through chainmail at 100 paces. But this crossbow has no archer. Instead, it has a trigger mechanism of rope and wood, hidden beneath the bridge's surface, connected to a pressure plate concealed beneath loose stones in the roadbed. The weight required to trigger it is considerable. Too much for a man on foot, too much for a cart. But a warhorse carrying an armored knight, moving at a trot, will provide exactly the force needed. Sir Gaspard does not see the mechanism because it cannot be seen. The crossbow is wedged into the stone architecture of the bridge itself, angled upward, aimed at the precise point where a rider's torso would be as he passes. The trigger plate is covered with dirt and gravel, indistinguishable from the rest of the road surface. Everything is hidden, patient, waiting for the weight of inevitability. The morning is gray with mist rising from the river. Sir Gaspard rides his destrier, a massive gray gelding bred for war, onto the bridge. The horse's hooves ring against stone, a sound that echoes off the water. The knight's mind is elsewhere, perhaps on the day's training schedule, perhaps on politics at court. He does not look down at the road beneath his horse's feet. Why would he? He has crossed this bridge 1,000 times. The destrayer's front hoof strikes the pressure plate. The weight compresses the mechanism beneath. Ropes tighten. A wooden lever releases. And in the shadows below, the crossbow fires. The sound is enormous, a crack like thunder compressed into a single instant. The bolt erupts upward through the gap between stones, traveling at a velocity that makes it almost invisible. It strikes Sir Gaspard in the left side, just below the ribcage, where his armor is joined by leather straps and offers less protection. The force is catastrophic. The bolt punches through boiled leather, through gambeson, through skin and muscle and organs, emerging from his back and continuing upward into the morning air before falling into the river. Sir Gaspard's body jerks violently. His hands lose grip on the reins. The horse, terrified by the sound and the sudden scent of blood, rears and bolts forward, throwing its rider. The knight hits the stone surface of the bridge hard enough to crack bone. He lies there, pinned by his own armor, a wound the size of a fist in his side. Blood spreads across the stones, running between the cracks, dripping down into the river below. He is conscious for perhaps a minute, long enough to understand that something has killed him, but not what or how. He tries to call out, but the bolt has destroyed his lung. Only blood comes from his mouth. His vision darkens at the edges. He stares up at the gray sky, at the mist, at the indifferent morning. Then darkness folds over him completely. His body is discovered an hour later by a merchant's cart. The merchant sees the dead knight, sees the massive wound, sees the blood. He looks around wildly for attackers, for bandits, for archers in the trees. He sees nothing. No one. The forest is silent except for birdsong. There is no sign of struggle, no footprints, no indication of ambush. The investigation focuses immediately on human attackers. The Duke's men search the surrounding forest for days, looking for archer positions, for camps, for any evidence of brigands or assassins. They find nothing, because there is nothing to find. No human archer fired that bolt, and the mechanism beneath the bridge, its purpose fulfilled, sits silently in shadow where no one thinks to look. Eventually, someone suggests that the bolt might have been fired from below. A search is conducted, but by then, the mechanism has been partially dismantled by the assassin, who returned under cover of darkness to retrieve the most incriminating components. What remains looks like debris, broken wood, frayed rope, pieces of iron that could be anything. The crossbow itself, the most identifiable piece, is already at the bottom of the river, weighted down with stones. The conclusion reached by the Duke's investigators is unsatisfying but inevitable. Sir Gaspard was killed by an unknown assailant using a crossbow, firing from an unknown position, who escaped without leaving evidence. Suspects are questioned. Men with grievances against the knight are arrested and tortured. Some confess under duress, then recant. None can provide details that match the actual method of death because none of them committed the murder. The case dissolves into frustration and rumor. Some say it was bandits of supernatural cunning. Others whisper about curses or divine judgment. A few suggest treachery from within the Duke's own court, but without evidence, such accusations are dangerous. Eventually, the investigation is quietly abandoned. Sir Gaspard is buried with honors. His horse is put down, as is custom for animals that throw their riders to their death. The bridge remains in use. Dozens of riders cross it daily. None know that they are passing over the site of a perfect murder. None realize that the very architecture they trust, the solid stone that has carried traffic for generations, was temporarily transformed into a weapon by someone who understood mechanics and patience and the deadly precision of inevitability. Somewhere, the assassin walks free. Perhaps he was hired, paid in silver that will never be traced. Perhaps he acted from personal hatred, executing a revenge so complete that even the victim never knew his enemy's face. Perhaps he watches from a distance as others cross that bridge, wondering if anyone will ever understand the brilliance of what he accomplished. A murder without a murderer. A weapon that destroyed itself. A death recorded in history but never explained. Only the river knows, and the river does not speak. Word count, 797 words. The drowning in dry land. Judge Balthasar is found at dawn. His servant enters the bedchamber, carrying a tray with bread and watered wine, as he has done every morning for 7 years. The door is locked from the inside, as always. The servant knocks, receives no answer, knocks again. Then, growing concerned, he fetches the steward. Together they force the lock with a pry bar, splintering the doorframe. The judge lies on his back in the center of the bed. His eyes are open, bulging slightly, his face frozen in an expression of abject terror. His mouth is wide, lips pulled back from teeth, as though he died trying to scream or gasp or cry out. His hands are clawed into the sheets, twisted so tightly that the fabric is torn. And his skin is wet. Not damp, not merely perspiring. Wet as though he has been pulled from a river. Water soaks his nightshirt, the bedding beneath him, even his hair. It pools in the hollow of his throat. Droplets cling to his eyelashes. The smell of it fills the room. Fresh water, cold and faintly mineral, with none of the staleness of bathwater or the salt of sea spray. The servant crosses himself. The steward stands motionless in the doorway, his face gone white. Neither man can speak. They are staring at an impossibility. The chamber is on the third floor of the courthouse, accessed only by a narrow spiral stair. The single window is barely large enough for a child to squeeze through, and it is shuttered and barred from the inside, still secured, undisturbed. There is no basin in the room large enough to hold more than a cup full of water for washing. No pitcher. No bucket. The chamber pot is dry. The rain barrel is 3 floors below in the courtyard. The nearest well is across the street. And yet Judge Balthasar has drowned. When the physician arrives an hour later and examines the body, he confirms what the servants already know but cannot accept. The judge's lungs are filled with water. Not partially. Completely. Engorged with it. As though he had been held beneath the surface of a lake until his body could fight no more and the water rushed in to claim him. But there is no lake. No river. No bath. The floor is dry. The walls are dry. The ceiling shows no sign of leak or breach. The rain stopped 2 days ago. Even if water had somehow flooded the room during the night, it would have left evidence. Warped wood, watermarks, debris. There is nothing. Only the wet corpse and the terror-frozen face and the question that no one can answer. The investigation begins immediately. Judge Balthasar was not a beloved man. He had presided over property disputes, inheritance cases, accusations of fraud and theft. He had made enemies with every judgment, ruined lives with the stroke of a quill. The list of people who wanted him dead could fill a ledger. But wanting and doing are separated by a chasm that none of the suspects can cross. How do you drown a man in a locked room 3 floors above the ground? How do you introduce enough water to fill human lungs without leaving a trace of moisture anywhere else? The court investigators question servants, examine the room inch by inch, interrogate every person who entered the courthouse in the previous week. They find nothing. No mechanism. No accomplice. No explanation. Theories proliferate like weeds. Some whisper of witchcraft, that a sorcerer called water from the ether itself to fill the judge's throat. Others speak of divine judgment, suggesting that God sent a localized flood to punish the man's corrupt rulings. The more rational investigators search for hidden pipes, for concealed reservoirs in the walls, for some ingenious mechanism that could deliver water, then drain it away. They tear apart the floorboards. They probe the walls. They find only stone and timber and empty space. What they do not find, because they do not know to look for it, is the method that actually killed him. The assassin used ice. Not in the way one might expect, not as a weapon swung or stabbed. Instead, the killer constructed a device of terrible ingenuity, one that required knowledge of both mechanics and the properties of frozen water. Suspended from the ceiling by cords of gut, nearly invisible in darkness, was a framework of thin iron, shaped like a cage. Within this cage, pounds of ice were packed, stolen from the judge's own ice house where winter's cold is preserved in straw through summer months. The cage was positioned directly above the judge's face as he slept. Beneath it, a small brazier of coals, also suspended, warmed just enough to begin melting the ice slowly. Not rapidly, not in a flood, but in a steady drip, drip, drip that fell directly onto the judge's nose and mouth. A man can sleep through rain. He can sleep through noise, but he cannot sleep while drowning. The water accumulated drop by drop. Balthasar woke, confused, gasping. More water dripped. He tried to rise, but the assassin had planned for this. A drug in his evening wine, not enough to kill, just enough to leave him weak and disoriented. He thrashed. He clawed at the sheets. He could not understand what was happening. Water kept falling. He gasped for air and breathed in water instead. His lungs filled incrementally, each breath more difficult than the last. It took perhaps 10 minutes. 10 minutes of private hell, of drowning one drop at a time, unable to escape, unable even to understand. By the time he died, most of the ice had melted. The warm air of the chamber did the rest. By dawn, the ice was completely gone. The water it became had soaked into the judge's body, his bedding evaporated into air. And the mechanism itself? The cords that held it were gut, organic material that, when wet, loses integrity and dissolves. The assassin had calculated this precisely. By morning, the cords had degraded into nothing, dropping the iron frame and brazier into a space between the ceiling beams and the roof, a gap no one would think to search, accessible only from outside the building. Days later, the killer returned, climbed to the roof in darkness, and retrieved the evidence through a loose tile. What remained was mystery. A locked room, a drowned man, no water, no explanation that satisfied the rational mind. The case became legendary, a story told in legal circles, in taverns, whispered by servants who swore it proved the existence of supernatural forces. Judge Balthasar's position was filled by another man, one who ruled more favorably in certain disputed cases. Someone benefited greatly from the judge's death. Someone who understood that the perfect murder is not one that goes unnoticed, but one that is so impossible, so utterly beyond explanation, that it transcends into the realm of legend and ceases to be investigated as a crime at all. The courthouse still stands. The chamber has been used by 3 other judges since then. None have drowned. But none sleep easily, either. Because once you know that death can come in impossible ways, that locked doors and high windows provide no safety, that water can fill your lungs in a room drier than bone, once you know this, every shadow holds threat. Every sound in the night is cause for terror. And somewhere, the method remains known to someone, perhaps recorded in cipher, perhaps passed from assassin to apprentice, perhaps waiting to be used again when the price is right and the target is chosen. Water leaves no trace once it evaporates, and some murders evaporate with it, leaving behind only bodies and questions and the cold certainty that we understand less than we believe. These deaths share a common signature. Not in method, each is distinct, ingenious in its own particular way, but in philosophy. They are murders that understood a fundamental truth. The perfect crime is not one that leaves no evidence, but one that leaves evidence so ambiguous, so impossible to interpret, that it ceases to function as evidence at all. A book that kills through devotion. A confessional that transforms sanctuary into slaughterhouse. A candle that illuminates the path to death. A bridge that becomes a firing mechanism. Water that appears from nowhere. A stirrup that injects corruption. Each method exploited not just opportunity, but psychology, the victim's habits, the investigator's assumptions, the limits of medieval understanding. The poisoned psalter succeeded because no one could conceive of prayer as a vector for murder. The confessional assassination worked because sacred architecture demanded anonymity. The mercury candle killed because its effects mimicked natural disease across a timeline too extended for pattern recognition. The crossbow mechanism relied on investigators looking for human archers rather than mechanical traps. The drowning exploited the impossibility of its own occurrence to transcend from crime into legend. The stirrup needle understood that infection was common enough to require no explanation. None of these methods required superhuman strength or access. None demanded split-second timing or theatrical confrontation. They required only knowledge, patience, and a willingness to think beyond the conventional boundaries of violence. They were assassinations designed by minds that understood systems, biological, social, architectural, mechanical, and knew how to turn those systems against their intended purpose. The medieval world was particularly vulnerable to such methods because certainty was rare, death was common, and explanations were few. Medicine was more philosophy than science. Investigation relied on confession and witness testimony rather than forensic analysis. The gap between effect and cause could stretch for weeks or months, severing the chain of causality in the minds of those seeking answers. A man could be murdered in March and die in May, with the weapon destroyed and the assassin in another country before the body cooled. And so these murders dissolved into the fog of history, becoming mysteries rather than crimes, stories rather than cases. They achieved what every perfect assassination must achieve. They killed their targets and buried the truth in the same grave. The victims died confused. The investigators failed. The assassins walked free, their methods perhaps recorded in cipher or passed to apprentices, or perhaps dying with them, taking the secrets into graves that would not give them up. We can reconstruct possibilities now with modern knowledge of toxicology and mechanics, with understanding of bacteria and metallurgy that the medieval mind did not possess. But reconstruction is not certainty. We will never know if the Psalter was truly poisoned or if some other cause claimed that nobleman's life. We cannot prove the mechanism beneath the bridge because the evidence is 8 centuries gone. The drowning remains impossible even as we propose explanations. That is the legacy of the perfect medieval assassination. Not just death, but doubt. Not just murder, but mystery that compounds across centuries. These methods remind us that cleverness can be more dangerous than strength, that patience can kill as surely as steel, that the most terrifying weapon is often the one you never see coming. In the great halls and fortified chambers, behind locked doors and guarded gates, the powerful believed themselves safe. They tasted their wine through servants. They slept with daggers beneath their pillows. They watched for enemies in the shadows and the crowds. But they could not watch everything. They could not suspect everything. And in that gap between vigilance and vulnerability, assassination found its opportunity. The candle still burns somewhere. The book still waits on a shelf. The stirrup still accepts the weight of an unsuspecting foot. Not literally. Those specific instruments are dust and rust and forgotten metal. But the knowledge persists. The methods could still work even now, adapted to modern materials and modern lives. Because human nature has not changed. We still trust the familiar. We still dismiss the impossible. We still believe that understanding provides safety. Some medieval murders were solved. Justice was served, however brutal. But these 6 that we have witnessed, remain wrapped in the darkness that conceived them. They are reminders that not all questions have answers, that some crimes are too clever to catch, that death can arrive wearing any face, speaking any language, hiding in any object or ritual or routine we take for granted. The castle sleeps. But some things never truly rest. Some secrets keep themselves, and some assassinations, centuries cold, still succeed in their final purpose, to make us afraid of what we cannot see, cannot prove, cannot prevent, to make us understand that we are never as safe as we believe.